Testing. Hi, everyone. This is Raquel Hernandez with Performance and Assessment in the virtual classroom. Welcome to our last live Google Hangout for the session. I can't believe it's been 5 weeks, and we're ready to wrap everything up. So before we get started, I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of what's going to be happening this week, just so that in case you didn't have a chance to read the announcements or watch the videos, you can know what's going on. Oh, and by the way, before you start, at the bottom left-hand corner of your live streaming video, if you're on the YouTube link that I provided in the announcements, there's a little tiny, gosh, I guess it's like a little bar, and it says be part of the conversation. So if you'd like to click on that, that's what enables the question and answer format, and I'm able to take your comments. And if for some reason, if I'm not seeing them, you can go ahead and type it on the events page as well, and I'll monitor that periodically throughout the broadcast. Okay, so just a little information of what's happening this week. If you notice on the right-hand side of the course, it says upcoming deadlines, quizzes, and all of them are listed. That's because they've been open the entire session, and now they're coming due. Our hard deadline is Sunday, December 14th at 11:55. And some people said, well, why wasn't it midnight? Coursera is a little strange in the way it calculates the time. So if we put it midnight, it would actually be the previous day. It would be the day before. So we had to set it to 11:55 p.m. if we wanted it due that night. So December 14th is the last day of the class. All of the quizzes will be due, including the final quiz. The peer assessment evaluation phase is actually over tomorrow at 11:55 p.m. So if you have not evaluated 3 of your peers, you still have time. You can click in and make sure you do that before 11:55 p.m. tomorrow. But don't take too long because those take some time to go through and evaluate. Okay, so let's see, I think we covered everything about the course for this week. Just a little bit about the final quiz. There's going to be 40 questions, and what I did was I chose 8 from each week's lecture. So you'll have a little bit of information that you need to review for each week, but don't take the final quiz until you actually view week's 5 lecture materials, because the last 8 questions is on that material. And once again, the hard deadline, same thing, December 14th at 11:55 p.m. But don't wait till the last minute. I know last session we had some time zone issues and just some technical difficulties, so you want to make sure that you get that in with plenty of time. Okay, so today our guest speaker had a family emergency and is not going to be able to be here. So I prepared a presentation on how online education works for special needs student populations. And just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I was a school administrator for many years. And in being a school administrator, you work with many different groups of teachers, including special education teachers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw on my experience working with special education teachers and in the virtual classroom, providing accommodations for special needs students, and I'm going to relate that to you. And I encourage you to enter your questions as the presentation goes on, and I will try to watch for those, and if it's appropriate, I'll stop and answer the questions. What I've also noticed, just giving you a little bit of background, is that there is a high need in virtual schools and virtual programs to develop processes for special education. Certain laws have to be complied with as far as meetings and reviews for special education students. And if a virtual education program is brand new, those processes may not be in place. And you want to make sure as an administrator, as a teacher, that you're in compliant with the special education laws. So right at the beginning of that program, preferably long before it even started, it's important to lay the foundation for a proper special education program so that students will have the accommodations that they need to be successful. So it's important that you work with district staff, with a special education coordinator, and with your special education teachers who will be working directly with your students and parents. Okay, the trends in online education is that it's becoming mainstream. There's really not a type of student anymore that gravitates towards online learning. It's kind of a myth that is developed. Sometimes it's just not not really what's going on in the virtual schools. There's lots and lots of different reasons that students come to virtual schools, but they do have one thing in common. The parents and the students are looking for flexibility within the program in order to meet their needs. So we know that online education can take place formally, as in a full-time comprehensive elementary school or high school, or it can be just in online programs where they're taking a class here and there. At any rate, the accommodations need to be met for both types, whether it be an informal program where they're just taking a class or whether it be a regular district virtual school. And just to be aware that most every district is transitioning to offer some sort of virtual classes, whether it be for summer school, it might be replacing the independent study programs, or it might be targeted specifically towards credit recovery. It just depends on the needs of the district and what they're offering. Many high schools now, however, and I'm thinking of the state of Michigan, that's one example that comes to mind, are requiring students to take a virtual class. So if that's the case and you're requiring students to take a virtual class, it is imperative that you have the needs to meet, you have the instruments, the technology, the capability of meeting the needs of special needs students. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, a little bit about special needs students. Sometimes they come to virtual education seeking options. Traditional school may or may not be working for them, or they're looking for ways to help their children be more successful in the virtual environment. They may have medical needs that require them to be at home, or they may have frequent doctor's appointments that make getting to and from school difficult, or they may miss a good chunk of time at their brick and mortar school and then feel like they're falling behind. So virtual school offers them options to complete the coursework when they're ready, and sometimes even when they're feeling well, so that they can be successful when and where they need to be. And sometimes that's in the home environment, sometimes it's in a computer lab, sometimes it's just at a different time of the day. The student may do better in the afternoon than the morning. Student may do actually great in the morning and not by the afternoon not be feeling well or not be up to working in their classes. So this is what virtual education does, is it provides the options so they are not on a bell schedule, so they can work as needed. Also, we're looking for that least restrictive environment. Virtual schools allow special needs students flexibility, the IEPs, the individualized learning plans, and the ability to get the education in a non-threatening environment, which truly is the least restrictive environment. They're with their peers. And just a reminder, public virtual schools need to abide by the same special education laws provided by the IEPs, and they do need to have the proper support staff as well. So it's very important as a school administrator, if any of you are launching virtual schools in your particular districts, that you have the foundation, the policies, and the background needed to make sure these students are successful in your programs. Okay, so accommodations. I'm going to talk probably about the top 5 accommodations that I've seen overall in virtual schools. And colleagues ask me all the time, well, is there an accommodation that can't be met? Well, I haven't seen one yet. However, sometimes it takes a bit of creativity and it takes working with the families to see what they're comfortable with. So one of the biggest concerns is, well, how will this accommodation be met in the virtual classroom? So the most important thing that administrators can do is to anticipate accommodations. And when the administrator is going through the LMS selection process, it is very important that their LMS be capable of delivering the accommodations needed. Otherwise, you get into the program, you find that there's an accommodation that needs to be met, and it's very difficult to do after the fact. And it can create it can create technology problems. Okay, how are we going to solve this problem with technology if we need to meet this accommodation? But if the LMS already has that built into it, you'll be at a tremendous advantage for that teacher to be able to easily administer that accommodation without delay. So sometimes you don't want a gap between the time the accommodation is requested versus the time it can be implemented. So it's very important that you have it in place. So as an administrator, what you want to look at for LMS selection is you want to anticipate the types of accommodations that may be needed, and then get a demo account of the LMS if needed and say, can this LMS provide this service to students if needed? And if it can't, what would be the workaround for it? Would the teacher have to schedule an office hour? Would the teacher have to call the family on certain occasions to administer this? So I would probe and ask the LMS, ask questions, and make sure it's capable of doing the things that you can anticipate may be needed. Okay, so some common ones are extra time for tests and quizzes. Some LMS systems are very good at doing this. You can go into a student's quiz and click on extra time and open it up for another half an hour, another hour, or even unlimited time if they need it for a particular week or whatever it might be. Other LMS systems have barriers to that. If you open up to one student, it may make you open it up for the class, and then it could create some integrity issues. So you want to figure out how your LMS behaves when you're trying to provide extra time to a student. Extra time for lessons is usually very easily met as an accommodation, because the student is able to go back and review material anytime that they feel that they need to. So if they watch material, they're doing a web lesson, a video, and they feel like they need an extra review, it's usually available to do that. Now, an exception to this would be some kind of LMS locking program. I have seen LMS programs that once a student goes through a lesson, it locks them out and they're not able to access the material. And some schools may have good intentions. They say, okay, well, this is for course integrity. We want to move on to another topic. But having those lessons for review really serves a lot of purposes, and it can really help a student with special needs who may have to go back and review certain material. So it's preferable if it's built into the LMS system, so it's ready to go. Another common accommodation for special needs student would be a separate testing area. So sometimes if students have difficulty with noise levels around them, or just need a private area where they're able to process things a little bit better, sometimes teachers would, in the brick and mortar school, would have them in a library, or maybe have them in a quieter area of the classroom. Well, in the virtual school, this may seem, okay, well, isn't that inherent? Once it seems like it would be common for every student to do that, but that's not always the case. So sometimes the home environment may be noisy, there may be pets around. Sometimes it may not be most of the time it is, but every once in a while it may not be the best environment for the student to take a test, especially if the computers aren't working, or there's some technical problems too. So in this case, you would work with the family and make sure that it was an arrangement that the student felt comfortable with. So it may be going to a local computer lab. It may be going to a library. It may be as simple as just putting headset on like this. I can concentrate and I don't have to worry about any noise in the house. So work with your families on this, and work with your special education teacher to make sure this accommodation is met, but don't assume that it's met just because a student is at home in the virtual environment. Okay, another common accommodation that we see from special needs students might be that the teacher reads the instructions or the test aloud to the student. So a lot of times if a student needs, they process things through hearing them a little bit better maybe than visually, or they have challenges with reading, it may be beneficial for the student to have the teacher read the directions aloud. So there's two ways that this can go in the LMS system. Some LMS systems have a text-to-speech program where the student can turn on the audio for a particular lesson. However, I have not seen one with tests. I have not seen an LMS program that can read tests to them, especially if the tests were computer generated. Usually these are pre-made scripts that someone records a podcast for and uploads them into system, or they're included in some kind of file that's embedded in the program. I have not seen one though for tests, like I said, especially if they're teacher made. So in this case, that you have a couple options. The first option would be to meet the student in some kind of web conferencing program, such as this one, and to read the directions aloud to the student. Okay, that's perfectly acceptable and that works well. Another thing that I have done in the past is I have a document camera, similar to those you would find in a brick and mortar school, that I can attach right here to my computer, and the student can view the exam or the test. I print it out, the student views the exam or the test, and I kind of point to the words as I read, and I make sure that the student has the same page at home, has printed it out as well, and then I read the directions. That's one option. The other option is to use technology and have a program where it will read any word on a screen. So it doesn't come from the LMS system per se, but it's an external program that the student can use to have any words on a screen read to them. That works as well. Okay, the next accommodation might be retakes on a test or quiz. So a student may have an accommodation of having multiple chances to take a test. Oh, and I just thought of something too. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about shortened workload. So in this case, you want to make sure that your LMS can do resets for a particular student. Sometimes it has limitations with this, that it's very difficult to go in and set it for one student without resetting an entire class. So you want to make sure before your district purchases an LMS system, hopefully, that's not always the case, but before you get that far in the process, that the LMS has capabilities of resetting a test or quiz particular to one student and not an entire class. Okay, and I thought of another accommodation too that I'd like to discuss, and that one is a shortened workload or excusing assignments. So let's say a particular student needs less subject material to show mastery, less assessment. So instead of doing 10 questions on an assessment, maybe they would do 3 to show mastery. This can be a little bit challenging with the LMS system because many times the points are built into the system and it will throw off the grade book. So if you only grade the student, if the student only takes 3 problems on a quiz, they get 100% on them. If there was 10 questions on the quiz, it'll only show as a 30. So a couple things that would be good here. You want to make sure that your LMS system has a manual override for the gradebook. So the question is, can you go in and manually change a grade if the student only took part of it? So you have to be able to go in, view the test or quiz by hand, grade it, and then calculate the percentage based on what the student took. Then be able to go into the gradebook and manually override whatever automatic score was put in there. So that may seem easy, like, yeah, you should be able to just override every score, but in some LMS systems, it is not very easy to do. And there was some cases where I ended up taking the student's work and calculating a grade manually for them. If needed, you may have to do that. But it's nice if the LMS system has a grade book where you can just go in, change the score, and it doesn't affect everything. The other thing you want to look for in an LMS gradebook as far as assessment is you want to make sure that assignments can be excused without penalty. So if a student did have an accommodation of a shortened workload, would you be able to go in and excuse assignments for them in the gradebook without having it affect their total grade per se? So you may have to do some manual calculations, figure out if the gradebook is behaving properly and calculating it the way you need to before you do that. Or else what happens is, especially with LMS systems that have automatic zero entering, what happens is a student will log on, some work was supposedly excused, the LMS system would put zeros in, and the student looks and they see that they have an F, and it can be very discouraging. So in some cases, what I've done is I've avoided the gradebook entirely for that particular student, and I would just calculate it by hand to make sure that their grade was accurate. Okay, and it seems more and more the way I'm talking, and you can probably see the importance of choosing an LMS system. It's absolutely critical. So if your district is thinking of migrating to another system or is thinking of purchasing one, you have to be able to write down all the things that the teachers need and make sure you include your special education staff to see if those accommodations can be met in the LMS system. Okay, and then moving on a little bit to specially designed instruction. A lot of districts are a little bit hesitant. They say, well, how are we going to offer specially designed instruction to our students who may need extra tutoring time, who may need that one-on-one work with the teacher? Well, that's when the live conferencing sessions come in, and that's when you need a synchronous component to your courses so that that accommodation is met. So web conferencing programs such as Blackboard Collaborate or WebEx, as long as it's secure, you want to make sure that you have a way to communicate with that student one-on-one so that they'll be able to receive the tutoring that they need. If you don't have a web conferencing program, phone also works. There are other unsecured programs out there that you may need to check with your IT department to make sure that the privacy is there and the security is there for students as well, for the protection of the students. So you want to make sure that you have some way to do a synchronous component if you need the tutoring, if you don't have the luxury of having a district office or a classroom that the student can attend for tutoring. Another accommodation that students may receive are extra study guides or review materials. So for example, they need to watch an extra video, or they may want a study guide. These are things that should be built into the LMS system if your course is compliant with the ADA Act. So as you're designing your courses, as you're thinking about redevelopment, you want to see what is in place and what your courses may need to be compliant. So if a student needed to print out the lesson, would they be able to do that in your course? So let's say the student had trouble reading material on the screen and preferred it to be printed out. Would you have a convenient way to do that with a PDF file instead of having the student print out pages and pages of, or do screenshots of everything? So you have to think about user-friendly, would the student be able to do that? So a good virtual course will have a PDF file available, the text of the lesson that's being taught, so the students can have a study guide. And the teacher can develop also resources to have in the course for the students to print out and use in case they need tech support like that. So I think the bottom line is making sure that the course is delivered in a format that has multiple ways of delivery. So does the course have audio? Does the course have visual? For example, the videos or animation. Does the course have regular text? So the more ways that you can communicate the material, the easier it'll be, and the more accommodations you'll be able to meet for a student that has a certain learning style and a certain preference for a learning style. Okay, for students who may have difficulty with writing and reading, there are several sound programs available out there. And you want to make sure that either the school provides it, if it is a reasonable accommodation, or that the LMS program has it built into it. So there are many programs where the students can speak and it will produce text. So in case a student, let's say, needed to write an essay, they would be able to read it into a microphone and the program would produce that into text. And then the opposite. So if there was text on the screen, would it be able to be read to the student? Okay, so how can all this be accomplished in a virtual environment? The biggest thing is choosing the correct LMS, making sure that both the teachers and the students have the technology needed, webcams, microphones, special programs that might be needed. I know there was one program that I used in particular was a digital pen. If a student had trouble typing, they would be able to write on the digital pad, and it was just like handwriting. That worked. You want to make sure that you work with your administration and your IT department to make sure that security measures are in place. Any special education documents, the IT department and the district as well usually will have special rules for encryption or password protection to ensure confidentiality, and it must comply with all FERPA and confidentiality laws for special education students. So in the virtual environment, it may be challenging, and the faculty, the staff, and the administration have to be very aware of how information is distributed, what information is distributed, and whether that information is securely distributed. Those three things are very necessary for any environment working with students, not just with special education students, but any student. Okay, so, and just as a wrap up, special education can be an amazing thing in virtual education. I have seen lives absolutely transformed from a brick and mortar environment to the virtual online environment. Family partnerships can become extremely strong, and sometimes it just takes picking up the phone and seeing what can be done to help a particular student, and the teacher being willing to to be a little bit creative to meet any accommodations that might come their way. I've seen the pace of life slow down tremendously for special needs students. Sometimes it was a tremendous challenge, maybe getting to a brick and mortar school or having absences, and it's just made a huge world of difference for those students. Students can have the flexibility that they need for medical appointments, for a counseling session, or maybe even just for moves if needed. All right, and I think that's it. I'll go ahead and look at our question and answer to see if we have any question and coming up. And let me see if I can get that. Okay, give me 1 second and I'll just take a look at our Q&A. Okay, and I think we're good. All right, so this will be our last session before the end of the virtual class that we're having now, performance and assessment in the virtual classroom. And I'll probably do one wrap-up video before the end of the week. But I wanted to thank everyone for watching tonight, and take care. Bye-bye.